So, the first year, do you remember the courses you attended? Were they exciting? Or what would you say?
Very well. I mean, first 2 years or 3 years even, I can tell you. I mean, that's the second turning point. The first turning point of my mathematical sort of career was Racine. This graduate course, see, you must remember at those days, there was no graduate courses in India. By a graduate course, to what I mean is in US, for example, you go to a PhD program. First 2 or 3 years, first 8 mathematicians give lectures on other things in a very advanced level. Then you absorb them and you choose your subjects. Here in India, what happened was you finish your master's degree or BA honors, you go to the teacher, somebody, he will give some problem, which may not be particularly interesting.
Right.
So you never learn anything more than what this teacher tell you.
Yeah.
He will, I mean, I was not joking now. Somebody will give a definition of a group and immediately give an problem. It may not be too trivial, but so it was like that. There was no broad-based education at all.
Right.
So for the first time, I think in India, as far as I know, there were 2 or 3 year courses and basic courses. The graduate courses were done in.
Right.
Of course, it probably a little less, more elementary level in the US, because students who went into that from the university system are not well prepared.
Right.
But anyway, the whole concept was there, which was increased. The level was increased.
Right.
So the first year, there was a course by Warren Ambrose, American mathematician, and he gave a course. So he came, first lecture. But we said, we don't know what is set topology. He said, don't worry. And then just, I remember still, 2.5 hours, he gave all the important things necessary for the set topology. Of course, he gave some other text to read or something, so that you can get into that.
Right.
And he defined topological groups. I mean, we knew, some of them didn't probably even know groups. We knew groups because of Racine. So topological groups. Then Hall measure introduced. We didn't even know measure theory.
Right.
So what he did was, Seshadri and I have to give, sort of read a book and lecture on measure theory, Hall mass, for example.
Right.
So, and then he introduced Hilbert spaces, I'll tell you why. And then spectral theorem for compact self-adjoint operators. And used that to prove Peter-Weyl theorem and so on. You see, within 4 months or 3 months for a raw person who goes from nothing. But somehow we could absorb it and then make it. And at the end, he introduced differential manifolds and differential forms. It became a bit difficult. But earlier, up to that, I mean, first of all, it opened one's eyes to some new and important mathematics.
Right.
And the second year, although you asked for the first year, but let me say second and third years, because second year there was a course by Eilenberg, the famous Eilenberg.
Right.
It's around the time the famous Eilenberg Srinivas axioms were. So he lectured on that. And he was amazing, I mean, lecturer. I mean, fantastic. And he taught the whole course, as we realized later, in a completely functorial way, without ever mentioning the word functors or categories. So that when we went into this, I said, I know this, you know what I mean, in a concrete situation. And then that was in fact, I still my notes about 340 pages, which I wrote down by my hand. Okay. And the third year for me was even the really, which made my future sort of interest in mathematics. That's a course by Laurent Schwartz, of whom we'll talk more later. And he is, as you know, a functionalist, famous theory of distributions. But for some reason, he decided to lecture on complex manifolds, not on. And that was a turning point. I mean, we didn't know what's a manifold, even manifold, complex manifold, Kähler geometry, and even more important.
You wrote notes for those lectures.
Right.
Yes, it's published. You can see these lectures.
Right.
Okay. So I meant all these sort of, and also more important, as a part of this course, he introduced Hart's theory, which is the theory of elliptic differential equation on manifolds. So that is what got me interested first in analysis. So he didn't prove those theorems, he simply stated. I started, reading the proofs. That's what interested. And the second thing was he introduced so-called Kähler manifolds. And that gave me a sort of fillip to read, again at that time, the famous Cordera-Spencer notes, not defamations, which I'll talk about later, where they used the newly developed sheaf theory and theory of harmonic forms to prove some very classical theorems to give correct proofs and also make an advance, like Cordera embedding theorem and so on. So that I could get into easily because of what Schwartz did in the course. And also many of these things you will see, as you will see, that it's a kind of reference point to me for many of my future, later things. So it was very lucky. You see, the first 3 years, I mean, to be exposed to, I mean, first of all, first 8 lecturers, everybody. I mean, Schwartz was an amazing lecturer and so on. So it was, I mean, really great. That's our graduate course, if you wish.
Right. When did you write your thesis? What is it on?
See, it is something to do with some kind of elliptic differential operators, and also using the theory of distributions to something on Riemann surfaces, the type of Riemann surface. You know, it was a big deal those days, but they were making a big fuss. I could, using theory of distributions, I could streamline it. And also some of the things I did at the time, I got familiar with some techniques, which I myself discovered, which were later very useful. Now, we'll talk about our going to Paris. I finished my thesis just before. But, you know, the university regulations, you have to be there to submit your thesis and so on.
You had registered earlier?
Registered earlier, everything. Registered earlier, and I finished my thesis, but then for technical reasons I had to wait 3 more years after I came back from Paris. So it was, and I found my own problems. I mean, Chandrasekharan sort of used to keep track of what I was doing.
The former supervisor.
The former supervisor. I mean, it's not just fully formal. He used to take, ask once in a way, what are you doing? What is, and then when I wrote my first paper, he sent it to only Schwartz, not to somebody else.
Did you take any courses with him? No.
With whom?
Did you
Oh, yeah. I will tell you. I mean, there's one more question. Okay, I'll tell you the answer, and then it will come again. He gave a course on zeta functions. That's maybe the first year or something. And that was very, very well written. Even now it's available at Tata Institutes. So that course I took. And that was quite useful because, not for zeta function, my later work with Kotake, the ideas of using this heat kernel for proving functional equation and so on, they were very useful indirectly. So that's the course I took with him. I still remember one problem, just more fun for mathematicians. So they used to say, oh, Riemann zeta function is defined this side, and it can be analytically continued. Now, the whole analytic continuation, we have learned it, you take a curve and go around something, you don't know what's happening. So, what I mean was, it's never said, then there is an analytic function everywhere or something. So, anyway, that was a very useful course.
But number theory did not fascinate you very much, despite that.
See, it did fascinate me, that's true. As you will see, I mean, my interest apparently is geometric. I mean, okay, we'll come to that. But analysis, I did some work, which is quite respectable.
Ramanujan's story didn't have any influence on you?
Okay. Ramanujan, of course, was well known. We all heard of Ramanujan. Okay? And also its importance to give confidence to Indians as a nation, as a whole nation. I don't mean only scientists. General people have heard of him, I think, and also remembered his name because of this. This kind of confidence. See, people ask whether I came to mathematics because of Ramanujan, because many Indians have come to that. That's not my case. Maybe one reason is also that, see, everybody talked about Ramanujan, even mathematicians, but it was not easy to access what he was doing, what is actual mathematics, except to hear great things. Number theory, I was not particularly interested, but later, for some other reason, I do a bit of number theory, but at that time, no. So, immediately after Schwartz's lecture, I started working on partial differential equation. Immediately.
So, after you wrote your thesis, you left for France before actually getting the degree?
Yeah, right.
This was as some kind of postdoctoral?
Yes, that is postdoctoral. In the sense, actually, we are employees of CNRS.
CNRS.
CNRS. That is the National Council of Scientific Research, which of course has different levels. So entry level people, and then like Filippo came, who's a director of research and so on. Okay, it's not in the university system, but it just goes by itself. I think the entry level is called attaché de recherche. So the French mathematicians somehow saw to it that Seshadri and I had that position. Okay, in principle we could have continued forever, but that's a different story. Okay, and the travel was paid by Tata Institute for us. So they stay by this CNRS fellowship. Yeah, and also we were given leave for 3 years.
By the Tata Institute.
Tata Institute. That's important, you know. I mean, it's not otherwise you say, okay, you go or something. So in some,
initially they give you 3 years, or they kept extending it. Yeah.
I don't remember. It was understood we go for about 3 years, and that will be, that will be given. I mean, so that we are placed to go back if you do it properly. You don't have to come and again look for the jobs and then apply for one postdoc to one postdoc.
But this system has changed now. Tata Institute is no longer thinking of PhD students anymore as their sort of employees, or there is no continuation.
There is no continuation. That's because it has become part of a university system.
So what kind of interaction, if any, you had with Chandrasekharan and Raghunathan during those 3 years before you left for France?
Before I left for France, yeah, that's it. Okay, first let me say about, Raghunathan. So the first year when I came, Seshadri and I came to Tata Institute, he was living by himself, not with his family, because maybe he didn't find a house immediately or something. So we used to go on long walks in the evening, with the KGR. And he had
where would you go for a walk?
Marine Drive.
Marine Drive.
Marine Drive from
this
Marine Drive. And he used to tell, he had, as well as Chandrasekharan, had contact with some of the greatest mathematicians when they were in Princeton. Siegel, Hermann Weyl, and others. For example, Chandrasekharan was assistant of Hermann Weyl for 2 years. And also KGR was associated with Emil Ortin as well as Siegel. And also therefore they developed a big, high mathematical culture when we were there. And Ramanathan, used to sort of transmit to us during those walks. For example, we learned about, modular functions, Riemann surfaces, and then uniformization theorem and whatnot, which all I'm sure he learned from Siegel or something. And also, in some sense, what is called arithmetic groups now. And some of these were very useful to me later. Maybe we understood about half of it, but then it gave another level of exposure to mathematics. And also I must say one more thing in that case. My work with Seshadri used a paper, Andhra Vail. Now, that paper was, even when we were students, KGR means K Ramanathan used to tell us that's a very important paper. So how does he know that? How did he know that? Siegel told him it's a very important paper. So see, if we didn't know that paper, I know, for example, one of the famous mathematicians who worked on that in Harvard or somebody, he didn't know about Andhra Vail's paper. He said after, I didn't know about Andhra Vail's paper. So that was we sort of remembered it and then used it. Also, it seems Siegel said, named another famous German mathematician and said, he should read that paper, but you won't understand it. So that is with the KGR. To start with K Chandrasekharan, it was a little more formal. We would go for a walk or something like that. But then he used to call the students to his office and talk for 1 hour, 2 hours, and then, for example, as I told you about zeta functions and so on, I learned
from him.
But who wrote the notes for this? Is it he himself wrote?
He himself wrote. He himself wrote.
And then tell us about your experience in France.
At that time, as I said, because of these harmonic forms and whatnot, I was interested in PDE. I had done some work. I went to France, intending to work with Schwarz on partial differential equation. And was even in partial differential equation was a very important time, because soon after theory of distributions was by Schwarz was introduced, and Schwarz and his students were streamlining whole PDE using systematically theory of distributions. So that was one thing. And at the other side, so I was quite involved with him and some of his students like Lyons and so on, Father Lyons. On the other hand, there was a sort of big thing going on algebraic geometry of Grothendieck. We'll talk about it later. I knew that was very important, but I was not directly involved, but I was sort of looking at it from a slightly distant place, not directly involved. On the other hand, Seshadri was quite involved with some of them. Then I fell ill seriously. I had to spend a few months in the Alps and so on. So at that time, the Codera-Spencer paper on deformations of complex structure, not the one as I said earlier, has come out. And in a preprint form, huge preprint like this. And Schwarz has received a copy of the preprint. And then he gave me as a reading matter in the Alps. And that made a big difference, because that's the new techniques which go into many of my work was from that paper. And one good thing was, for me, it used not complex so much, several complex variables, in spite of the name. It used partial differential equations, elliptic equations. Since I was familiar with elliptic equations, thanks to Schwarz, I had no problem in reading all that. That was again a small, like otherwise, elliptic PDE and so on. I mean, you may get lost. So, I mean, that's the other one. And later I work with Kotake. And also more important for me, that stay in those places. You see, there were people from different, students usually, from different walks of life. People from working class or haute bourgeoisie, but everybody was ill, so they were all equal. So
in the hospital.
It's a kind of sanatorium. So we are all equal in the sense. So as I said, one good thing which happened was I came into contact with people of different social strata, from haute bourgeoisie to working class people, which, for example, doesn't happen to us today. I mean, even here. And that's because of the particular place I was there, all were similar problems and so on and so forth. And also I got to know what were their problems and what were their aspirations and so on. And one thing which I remember is, I mean, there was a working class person who was preparing for exam in one of the haute école, which means something even bigger than these IITs and so on. So I used to teach him some mathematics, and he passed. That means, he goes from completely one class to another class. So he was very happy. And when he got married, he asked me to be his best man. So anyway, this was very interesting. So in some sense, you asked me about the cultural shock of going to. There was, when I go to France, it was not so much of the cultural shock, but my whole view of looking at the world and how things happen completely expanded. If you had just stayed in our own place, it is not the same, okay? Right. So, I mean, that was very important. And of course, mathematics, also by either direct talk with Schwarz and company or osmosis from Grothendieck and so on. Right. That also had an effect. And of course, the most important from the actual work is meeting a Japanese mathematician called Kotake, Takeshi Kotake. So how it happened was, he came from Japan to work with Schwarz. Then Schwarz will meet his PhD students or other students. He will be in his room. There will not be enough space. So there was a bench outside. So number of his students or somebody will be waiting outside to take their turn.
Right.
And then this Kotake was sitting next to me. I didn't know him before.
Right.
We started talking. And she also seemed to know one of my papers, not a big paper, but somehow. So that's how we got to know. And then we did this work, which I think is quite, I mean, probably I can say that was my first really
serious
high-level work. And we continue to be friends. He passed away some years back. But when I was in Japan last January, or no, December perhaps, I met his wife.
Right.
Who is not British. Who is British.
Who is British, yeah.
He lives in Japan.
That was in Japan. She still lives there. Yeah. She lives. He went back to Japan. And so I would say this generally opening up the minds, not only for mathematics, but also for sociological conditions.
Right.
And of course, coming into contact with Kotake. And,
I just want to pick up from there. You know, you were just now saying something about brain drain and various other issues that we will discuss afterwards. But from what you just now said, this is what I have always kind of said, that if you stay just where you are, this opening of mind or brain that you mentioned, that, I mean, whatever one might say, we just don't have the breadth or the canvas that's as big as the world stage offers.
Yes.
So I would imagine every young person, if they are particularly good, they should have an opportunity to go elsewhere, learn more, and then some of them come back. Of course, many don't. And you know, I don't know when you were young and many of you went. Perhaps a lot of you actually came back, right?
Yes, yes.
Which is not the case today, right?
And also when my own students, except Raghunathan because he was working in a different field,
right.
As soon as they finish their PhD, I used to send them to ITIA for 6 months or 8 months. I mean, Ramanan, Patodi, and Ramadas perhaps, and Nitsure and so on. Of course, Raghunathan went to some other place because of his interest. And that was important to them. Of course, ITIA also helped. For And so that's certainly.
But every one of them came back.
Of course, every one of them came back.
I mean, none of your students, I think, have actually stayed on. Yeah.
One tried to, but come back.
Right.
Going back to France days, apart from Kotake, were there any other close mathematical contacts of that kind?
Not. I had a good contact with Jacques-Louis Lyons, because he was a student of, maybe the first student of Schwartz. Somehow we got along very well. Not that we did any work, but we used to talk mathematics and so on. I think I would say he is the other person, apart from talking to Schwartz. Malgrange was also there, but I didn't have too much contact with him.
Who?
Malgrange was also there, but I didn't have too much, contact with him. And also with staying in France in those, not a very restricted place, also helped me to learn French at a high level, so that I could speak French fluently and also lecture mathematics in French. But if I just stayed in sort of guest house or something, or I stayed, I mean, you will just not even television those days, I suppose, so you could not have worked.
Right, right.
And you know, you are generally of a leftist persuasion. Does it go back to those French days, or even earlier? Right?
Yes, this is a part of my opening of my mind. In the sense, I told you, I mean, I came into contact with all class of people. In fact, even the bourgeoisie side, very good. In fact, I used to go, there's some famous 16th arrondissement, 16th section of France, of Paris, where really the very high level people lived. So I used to go and play bridge in Sundays there. On the other hand, I also contact with these working class, persons. So in some sense, you try to, and otherwise you just talk to mathematicians perhaps, and then more or less of a similar background and so on. You never get to know what's really happening.
Did Schwartz have any influence on you as
no,
his leftist?
No. Yeah, but contrary to what people think, no. It is, I think, going to France, not that there was of course there was some leftist at that time, quite serious, but not because of that. It simply gave you opportunity to look at the world from a larger background.
Yeah.
As I said, also I understood what were the problems and what was the aspirations of different class of people. That makes you think more.
Right.